Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York.
And all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried.
Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarms changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures.
Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversary, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to lascivious pleasing of a lute. Now that was the opening to Act 1, Scene 1 of Shakespeare's Richard III, and as we'll find out, Shakespeare was not the best historian in the world. So shall we take it away? Good morning everybody, unless of course you're watching this video in the evening. In that case, good evening, and you're watching Time Travel TV, and today we're going to be talking about the reign, life and times of my favourite king, Richard III. So, Richard III was born born on the 2nd of October 1452 during the Wars of the Roses to the House of York. Wars of the Roses were a time when the House of York and the House of Lancaster were battling who would become king. Now, when he was born, it was the House of Lancaster on the throne, except this was not last long, because one of his brothers, Edward, would take the throne, seize the throne for the House of York in 1461. Richard had two brothers. One was his older brother Edward, and his other was his other brother George, Duke of Clarence. So Edward became Edward IV. And Shakespeare depicts Richard as being very jealous of his brother. This was not the case. In fact, Richard was quite happy for his brother, very loyal to his brother. We'll see more of his loyalty right now, in fact, because his other brother, George, Duke of Clarence, was a very unloyal person, very disloyal. That's better English, disloyal rather than unloyal. And when the band of rebels rose up against Edward IV in 1469, the Duke of Clarence, George, Duke of Clarence, joined them, and Edward had to go into exile in the Low Countries, and Richard went with him. This shows his loyalty. This would be a perfect time for Richard to jump ship and join the rebels, except he joined Edward and went with him to the Low Countries. This should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. Because a year later, they came back. It was good job Richard did side with his brother, and we'll see why right now, actually. Because they came back, they convinced Duke of Clarence to come back onto their side, and Edward became king again. So Edward never forgot how loyal Richard was, and he also never forgot how disloyal George was. So when George was found to be even more disloyal in 1478, he had him executed. He said, "How do you want to be executed? I'm supposed to execute you by hung, drawn, and quartered. But I'm going to ask you, how do you want to be executed?" So George Duke of Clarence, said he would like to be executed by being drowned in a barrel of wine. Very expensive wine, may I just add, not the cheap stuff. Not the supermarket stuff, if they had supermarkets back then. So, anyway, on the other hand, as I said, he remembered how loyal Richard was, so he gave him lots and lots and lots of money and lots and lots of land. He literally owned the north, Richard did at this point in time. So, as Shakespeare portrays him as a very bad person. There is no evidence for this at this time. In fact, only evidence of being a good person. He paid for lots of universities. He also gave lots and lots of money to the church. Another thing, Shakespeare depicts him as being born with very deformed, massive hunchback, withered arm. No evidence for his withered arm. We know this because they dug him up in 2013. They didn't have a withered arm. But he did have a curvature of the spine. Shakespeare presents him as being really deformed, sort of like that, and really miserly and things. This is not the case. In fact, it probably wouldn't have particularly shown up underneath his clothes. His one shoulder was slightly higher than the other, and also Shakespeare presents him as being born that way, although it's more likely this developed when he hit puberty. Which coincidentally, about the time his brother became king, maybe some stress going on there, I don't know. Anyway, things started to change when his brother died in 1483, and his brother's son, his nephew, also called Edward, I may add, became king, becoming Edward V. Edward V was one half of the princes in the Tower. By the way, the other prince in the Tower was Edward V's younger brother. And that's what they became known as. So what happened was Richard was put in place as protector, Lord Protector. So what happened was Richard wasn't a particularly good Lord Protector. He was take that back. He was a good Lord Protector, but he wasn't very good at staying Lord Protector, because he basically said that Edward was too young. So therefore that's one reason why he should seize the throne. And also he said that Edward, his brother Edward, was illegitimate. That was quite controversial at the time, and historians haven't really taken that particularly seriously until recently, where it's come to light that he may have been illegitimate, and he probably was illegitimate. So therefore Richard should have been the rightful king anyway. So therefore Richard was simply taking up his right. It was his right to be king, so therefore he ought to become king. So Edward V and his brother were sidelined. We'll talk a bit more about them in a minute. And Richard III became Richard III. Now, we haven't spoken about the House of Lancaster very much recently, have we? And they had been going through a tough patch. And they didn't really have anybody left to become king, except one person, which was Henry Tudor, who had a tiny claim to the throne. And it was so tiny, but they were the only person they had left to possibly become king, so they decided, let's go for gold in 1485, and they met at the Battle of Bosworth. Now, Richard III should have won. He had the numerical advantage, he had the strategic advantage, he even was a very brave soldier himself. He saw his opportunity, he took his vanguard, he went straight down the field, straight for Henry. They got so close, with scholars say within a sword's length of Henry, they got so close. Henry's standard bearer was even cut down. But when Richard III's horse was shot from underneath him, he said, a horse, my kingdom for the horse. He didn't actually say that, Shakespeare's doing. In fact, he was even offered a horse, but he said, no, I'm going to keep on fighting, ching, 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 ching. And he was eventually killed, hacked to death. When they discovered his skeleton, it was so badly damaged. It even had wounds that were probably inflicted after his death, which were absolutely horrific. So what happened is that Henry Tudor became Henry VII. And the first thing Henry VII did as king was try to demonise Richard III. So what he did, he said that Richard III killed the princess in the Tower. Nobody knows whether he did or not. It's the only two suspects we have are either Richard III or Henry Tudor. One of them did it. Whichever one did it, they didn't do it personally. We know that much. Richard III, if he did do it, probably got one of his servants to do it. Probably Tyrrell's quite an important person at the time. He also accentuated his deformed figure and his evil personality. Back then, it was thought that if you have a deformed figure, you've got a deformed mind, and we all know disabled people are all evil, don't we? I'm being sarcastic, by the way. The fact that he had a deformed body had absolutely nothing to do with the fact whether he was a good person or not. His reputation took another battering with Shakespeare. By the way, I know I've been hammering Shakespeare a lot, but I do like the play. It's a very good play. And I'm sorry, Ian McClellan, but my favourite Richard III, as far as Shakespeare's concerned, is definitely Laurence Olivier, and it's going to stay that way, so I'm very sorry, Ian McClellan. Although his reputation has taken a bit of an uptick recently, especially since they discovered his body under the car park, and he's become the king under the car park. He was buried in Greyfriars, which was a monastery, and but that was demolished in the dissolution of the monasteries, and they built a car park over the top of it, fairly long time after the dissolution of the monasteries. And he's become the king under the car park. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe. Make sure you put in the comments what you think of Richard III. I like him. Cheerio.